How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, December 31st, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, going into the 2022 calendar year, I'm going to lay out all of the basketball players for the 2022 calendar year that I've not only classified as elite or the greatest of all time, at least within the sport, but I'm also going to follow this up with individual profiles for each player that I name on this list. So I'm just going to skim through it this first time. And once it gets to their birthdays, I'm going to do an in-depth profile to take a look at their stats and their figures in the individual seasons, and then zoom out on a macro level to give you a sense of their achievements and their accolades since they've been in the league. So with that said, I'm going to dive into it. And before I get into the NBA, the only prospect that I have on here, just considering his circumstances, is Imani Bates, the player that skipped his senior year to go play at Memphis, and he still has to play another year next year because he would not be eligible to make the NBA draft this season. But it'll be interesting to see how Imani Bates plays this next year against players that are 22, 23, 5, 6 years older than him at this level before he makes it to the NBA and puts his own stamp on the league. So with that, I'm going to go into the Eastern Conference Finals, and just to start with the NBA, I'm going to start with the reigning champs, the Milwaukee Bucks. The lone player from the Milwaukee Bucks that made this list, of course, is the reigning All-Star Game MVP, the reigning NBA Finals MVP. He is a former Defensive Player of the Year and a two-time regular season MVP. Giannis Antetokounmpo turns 28 this year in December. Just to give a sense of where Giannis Antetokounmpo is, he's a player in the very midst of his prime, and of course a player that is very closer than a lot of people think to having a GO profile of his own. Also staying within the East, jumping out to, I guess if I want to go south to north, I guess I can go all the way down to Miami, starting with the Heat. The Heat have the only player representing the Heat on this list is Jimmy Butler. Their small forward who helped the Heat make it all the way to the finals in 2020 turns 33 this year. Taking a look at what's going on in Atlanta, the only player representing the Atlanta Hawks is their young point guard out of Oklahoma, Trae Young, who at this very moment is in the top 5 in the NBA in points and assists averaged in a season. It looks as though one day he may surpass Steph Curry's three-point shooting record, but as of right now, he still has a lot of NBA career ahead of him, so I wish Trae Young the best of luck. Jumping up to Charlotte, LaMelo Ball is the lone player representing the Charlotte Hornets, as he was 2021's Rookie of the Year, and of course he's building off an incredible year. And it looks as though he is going to be the face of the Charlotte Hornets as long as he's there for a bit. It looks as though they're going to build their franchise around LaMelo Ball, and he would not be a bad young player to build around. Moving up a little bit north to our nation's capital in D.C., the lone player representing the Washington Wizards is Bradley Beal. The player who finished second in the NBA in scoring last year will go on to turn 29 this season. So, of course, he's definitely in the midst of his athletic and physical prime. He's playing incredibly well. Moving up a little bit north to Philadelphia, there's two players representing the Sixers, but only one of them is playing. Their elite center, Joel Embiid, is, of course, a player that's been a perennial MVP and been in a lot of conversation since. And then their point guard, Ben Simmons, who was the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year last year, and at the same time still averaged 8 assists on the offensive end, is one of the few two-way NBA players that I have on here. He's one of the few players on this list that doesn't average 20 points a game, but everything else he does for the game is elite. So if we're talking about a 5-man sport where 5 people contribute on offense and defense, Ben Simmons is a very elite contributor to the game. Following that, or alongside him, or moving north a little bit, jumping to New York, the 3 players representing the Brooklyn Nets are, of course, exactly who people would expect. Of course, starting at point guard, their early point guard out of Duke, Kyrie Irving, turns 30 this year in March, as he is still having his situation with COVID where I don't think he's going to get vaccinated, and the Nets are more than likely going to let him play on the road, but they definitely won't let him play at home because of New York's vaccine mandate. At shooting guard, James Harden, the former NBA MVP, turns 33 this year. So, of course, many people are expecting a lot out of James Harden, and he is starting to get his game back together even with like the new foul rule being in place. James Harden is currently leading the NBA in assists, even as we are approaching the halfway point for the 2021-22 season. So, of course, no one really doubts his ability, even when his scoring is impacted, at least at the free throw level. And then, of course, to round out that big three is their GOATed small forward out of Texas, Kevin Durant. One of the most unstoppable scorers of all time. He turns 34 in September, so, of course, he's still playing incredibly well in his early 30s. So that rounds out the Nets. And then, of course, to finish out the East, moving up a little bit north, the only player to represent the Boston Celtics is Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum turns 24 in March. Taking a look at the players that are representing the Western Conference teams. Of course, starting with the reigning Western Conference champs, the Phoenix Suns are represented by two of them. Their point guard, Chris Paul, turns 37 today after being one of the big reasons that the Suns went from a team that was out of the playoffs to a team that went all the way to the finals in 1 year. And then, of course, their shooting guard, Devin Booker, turns 26 after putting up amazing scoring performances in every single year that he's been in the league, even though he came off the bench in college. So that's Phoenix. Jumping out to see what's going on in California. Of course, representing the Golden State Warriors, you have Stephen Curry, the Warriors' GOATed starting point guard. Last year's reigning scoring champ, and the current all-time NBA leader in three-pointers made turns 34 in March. And it looks as though he still has a good amount of years left ahead of him, considering he's still playing one of the best games in the NBA right now. And then, of course, alongside him is Klay Thompson, who hasn't played a game in 2 years. But I imagine that as soon as he gets back, he'll be back and ready. Not only is he an elite three-point shooter, and not only is he just a microwave that can score at any time, he is actually one of the league's best defenders as well. And I think for his for the way he plays both ways, and the fact that the Warriors would not have championships without him, points to the reason that Klay Thompson is one of the elite shooting guards in basketball in the league. Moving down to LA to the teams that occupy the crypto.com arena, starting, of course, with their GOATed small forward, LeBron James. He turns 38 this year on December 30th. Like, he just turned 36 the other day. But, of course, LeBron's still entering his 37th year. This past year in 2021, he had crossed the threshold of being in the NBA longer than he's been without in his life. So he's been in the NBA for the majority of his life. And considering he's been in the NBA for the majority of his life, he's still averaging what he was averaging when he was in his second year, when he first ascended to superstar status, averaging about 27, 7, and 7 for a Lakers team that's pretty disappointing, and he's not the reason why. He's been the only glimmer of consistency in this season. Also sitting alongside him is Russell Westbrook, the Lakers' starting point guard. Westbrook turns 34 this year, and of course, coming into this year, Russell Westbrook is, of course, a player. He is the player that leads the league. He has the most all-time triple-doubles in NBA history. So, of course, I have Russell Westbrook as a GOAT profile. And at the same time, 4 of his last 5 seasons, he's averaged double-digit assists, which is a very tough feat to do as a point guard. And then, of course, alongside both of them is Anthony Davis, their 28-year-old power forward, who was definitely needed and was a very big part of the reason why the Lakers won the bubble championship in 2020. His 2021 wasn't what a lot of people expected, but I would imagine he's incredibly fatigued. And I mean, once Anthony Davis gets himself back on track, he's still a very scary force that teams have to spend about weeks to game plan for. So that's the Lakers wrapping that one out. Jumping out to Denver, the only player representing the Nuggets is last year's reigning MVP, is the 2021 MVP Nikola Jokic, after he finished with the highest player efficiency rating in a season in NBA history. So, of course, that's why he's up there, being a center averaging at least 7 assists a game. Representing the Jazz, their shooting guard, Donovan Mitchell, turns 26 this year, after Donovan Mitchell has proven that he is a player that's worthy of being on this level, being the leading scorer by a wide margin on one of the best teams in the Western Conference. And then, of course, holding it down in the paint is Rudy Gobert, their center, who I believe is one 3 of the last 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. And not to mention that he's a 7'1" center with a 7'9" wingspan who actually averages double-digit points as well. But of course, he's most definitely on here for what he has been able to do on the defensive end and the fact that he still averages an incredibly high field goal percentage. He actually leads the NBA in field goal percentage this year as he's made over 70% of his shots. So that is the Utah Jazz. Taking a look at the teams that are playing in Texas, of course. The only elite player that I have rocking in Texas is Luka Doncic. The Mavericks elite shooting guard turns 23 this year after he's already had first team all NBA seasons. He's definitely on pace to being one of the best Mavericks, to being one of the best NBA players of all time, especially at this rate, as he and Trae Young are the 2 young guns that look to be taking over the league eventually one day. Taking a look now at the player that's representing the 2 players that are representing the Pelicans, both out of Duke. Their 24-year-old small forward Brandon Ingram and their 21-year-old power forward Zion Williamson. Ingram is playing for the team right now and is doing a really good job of trying to keep the Pelicans afloat, even though they're not afloat, they're sinking. Zion Williamson hasn't played a game all year as he's kind of dealing with like injury stuff, and as I don't think the weight is as much of an issue as many people attribute it to. But I think that once Zion has it under control, and once Zion comes back completely healthy and ready, the Pelicans should be a very dangerous team with both Zion and Brandon Ingram playing forward for this team. Look, going up to Portland, their starting point guard Damian Lillard, who's of course had multiple in all NBA seasons, is turning 32 this year. Jumping up to Minnesota, the 2 players representing the Timberwolves are their center, Karl Anthony Towns, who is the first overall pick in, I believe, the 2014 draft, if not the 2015 draft. And, of course, sitting alongside him is last year's 2020's first overall pick in the draft, Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. He is the lone player that I've added to this list. And it was because he had a really amazing rookie season alongside LaMelo Ball. Even though LaMelo Ball won, I think Anthony Edwards definitely deserves his respect for what he was able to do over his rookie season. And those are all the players that I have, at least that represent the Eastern Conference, the Western Conference, and then Imani Bates being the lone prospect. With that said, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 13 minutes of this piece. As I said, I'm only just listing through the players that are going to be on. As we go through the year, I will get into why these players are elite when I make their very own individual profiles. And even for a lot of them, excluding the exclusions, for every single NBA player that I've listed except for Anthony Edwards, I've made a profile in the year of 2021. So before their birthdays come, if you want to check out what I've already said about them, leading up to their birthday in 2021, I already have an episode up, or I should. And hopefully with everything going on, this will be a very interesting year, especially as we enter a whole new year of basketball. Thanks once again for listening to all 13 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another episode right after this. Peace out.